Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Havoc and welcome back to a critique of Jurassic World. This is the second part of the critique, so if you haven't yet, I recommend watching the first part in this series, as it lays the foundation for the series as well as covers the first 25 minutes of the movie. Just a fair warning, I have upgraded mics since making that video, so the sound quality will not be as good as in this video. The content, however, is well worth it. That being said, let's jump back into the movie. After the scene introducing us to Owen and the raptors, we're given a scene at a petting zoo and riding area for kids. It's here that I'm again reminded of how believable some of the park is. Just like the Innovation Center, the area with kids riding young Triceratops and petting young Gallimimus is presented just as you would expect to see if such a place existed. Sadly, we come back to the reality of our duo of nerd and uninterested teen, and they are still being very consistent with the one thing we know about them. Gray notes that he's still technically able to ride the Triceratops as he's only 47.5 inches, and Zach notes that
this place is for little kids.
He also tells Gray to cover up his dork pouch. Well, at least the movie is acknowledging it, I suppose. Zach then comes up with the idea to ditch Zara, their babysitter. Now, the writers never try to give us a reason for this. He just randomly chooses to ditch her. But why? Especially since we know Zach has a thing for every girl ever. Why would he want to ditch her? From what we know of him, you would think Zach would be spending the entire time hitting on her, or, well, in his case, perhaps just staring at her. But given what we know of him, why ditch her? She isn't pestering them or anything. In fact, she seems to be leaving them alone and just letting them wander around while she's on the phone. Ditching her only serves to get you away from someone who could potentially make life easier. This would be just a small issue if it weren't for the fact that their entire side story exists because of this completely arbitrary reason. I almost wonder why the babysitter is there to begin with. The boys seem to navigate the park fine on their own. They were able to figure out flying and taking a boat to get here by themselves, so I don't think finding a few exhibits should be too difficult. Their mother clearly seems okay with them being on their own, and Claire clearly can't be bothered to care. Even from a writing perspective, she doesn't seem to serve a purpose. In fact, she just creates this problem if the boys are to have the stories the writers want them to have. A problem that was needless to begin with. Just don't have the babysitter. It seems almost like the babysitter may be here for something later in the film. I don't know. I suppose we'll have to wait and see on that one. Anyways, the newly liberated boys go to see the T-Rex feeding next, and there are two callbacks right off the bat. There's a tied-up goat waiting for the T-Rex, and a flare is used to bring the Rex in. There's a viewing platform built to look like a giant log next to where the goat is positioned. At first glance, this may seem reasonable, but when the T-Rex comes in, it becomes obvious just how bad this design is. You see, the T-Rex head is level with where the crowd is viewing from. Why is this a problem? Well, individuals, not to mention large groups of people, well, they tend to move around a lot. If you know anything about the T-Rex from the previous movies, you know that the T-Rex's vision is based on movement.
Hey! Ian, freeze! Got the cage!
Don't move. You can't see us if we don't move.
Nobody move a muscle.
From outside the platform, you can clearly see all the people in the platform, meaning so can the T-Rex. Are you beginning to see the problem? If the T-Rex can see these people, and they're head level with it, has Rexy never once just wanted an extra snack? Has she never even tried to get to the visitors? Even if she couldn't break in, it wouldn't be great to have the Rex consistently trying to eat the guests because the park put them on a silver platter for her. If there's something special to the glass where the Rex can't see the people inside for some reason, the movie needs to include this detail somehow. Otherwise, this just ends up being another incompetent design choice. Now, while the Rex is having its daily goat, Zach takes a phone call. Apparently, the disinterested teen in him is so powerful that the Tyrannosaurus Rex itself can't even break through. I'm sorry, but do you expect me to believe that anyone, especially someone that age, would still be completely bored while looking at a T-Rex? The movie has clearly gone way too far to establish this awful excuse of a character. Not one single human on this planet would be so bored they just turn away and take a phone call while seeing a T-Rex in person for the first time in their life. I'm sorry, movie, there's not a snowball's chance in hell that I'm going to believe that. Anyways, through their phone conversation, Karen learns that Claire isn't with the boys as they explore the park. And with that, we cut to a phone call between Karen and Claire as Claire is driving. Worth noting is that there seems to be really good reception everywhere on the island so far. Interesting. We'll just hang on to that for later. Claire and Karen discuss Claire not being with the boys, and Karen uses one of their mom's lines to try to convince Claire. Karen begins crying at one point, and I'm pretty sure it's because she's mad, but is already speaking with the manager. I'm sure that's it. Poor Karen. Anyways, Claire is persuaded and decides she will take the next day off work to spend with the boys. Now, this scene was very needed as it slows things down and lets characters be characters. It serves to try to make Claire seem more like a member of the human species instead of a stale plank of wood. It would be better if it were a little earlier and more frequent, but this scene was a little breath of fresh air. Perhaps I'm overlooking something here, but I see nothing else of note, so we move on. Thankfully, the following scene also gives time for the characters to slow down and talk. While working on his motorcycle in front of his small house, Owen talks with Claire about Masrani requesting him to inspect the paddock. He makes several comments regarding their previous relationship, there are a few jokes of varying quality, and there's a bit of back and forth between the characters. Now, there are a few parts of this scene worth highlighting, beginning with the fact that the writers chose to subtly establish Owen is quite familiar with a motorcycle. This won't completely save what is to come in this movie, but it's always a good thing when something is established earlier instead of just pulling it out of nowhere. Now, during the conversation, the writers decide to give you a second chance at hearing one of the themes of the movie in case you missed it earlier. Owen tells Claire that the animals aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet and says they are indeed alive. Lowry would be so proud. The conversation also reinforces the only thing we know about Claire to this point, namely that she is a corporate person. Owen notes that she printed out an itinerary for their date, didn't want to have tequila, and continues to refer to the dinosaurs as assets rather than animals. The scene does give her some humanity, but it's far from perfect. Outside character development, there is one noteworthy part of the plot worth mentioning. Owen asks why Masrani would want him to inspect the paddock. That seems like a fair question to ask, but Claire's answer is bewildering. She says it's because he can control the raptors. Right. What does that have to do with the security of the paddock? Why wouldn't you consult engineers and people who know some specifics about the dinosaur rather than some random guy who works with raptors? How is his opinion going to be any more suitable than any of the other hundreds of workers in the park? What does controlling raptors have to do with this? Is there really no one better to have inspect the pen? Regardless, this is what we get, and we're just gonna have to like it. The movie then transports us to the Mosasaurus area with the boys watching a presentation on said creature. The presenter then moves a wire crane with a shark attached to it to dangle it over the water. Zach was very disinterested once again until getting splashed with water. Apparently that's the key to parenting a teen. Gray is also still nerding out to his heart's content about how many teeth this particular animal had. It's a short scene, but once again it gives us a real design flaw in the park. The mosasaur comes extremely far out of the water to grab the shark. So far that it could clearly lay its body over the wall that's around the water if it wanted to. As much as it isn't overly likely, the park would be powerless to stop it if it felt like doing so. The person giving the presentation, as well as likely several rows of the audience, could all be reached by the lack of protection offered. This is a major design flaw, but if it doesn't affect the plot, I suppose it's a flaw in representation rather than story. I mean, could you imagine this affecting the plot? That would be insane, wouldn't it? Anyways, we cut now to Claire and Owen arriving at the Indominus paddock. As they exit the vehicle and walk to the observation room, you can clearly see the construction crew still busily working all around the walls. Some men are even sitting on some metal beams having a break. Once again, this will be relevant in just a moment. Claire tells Owen about the park needing a new attraction and once again forgets that the park had far better options at its disposal, but we've been over that already. Owen and Claire proceed to discuss what the dinosaur is and how it was raised. Owen comments on the negative impact that raising an animal in isolation can have, and from the limited research I'm able to do on this topic, it does seem to check out. In fact, in some studies it's shown to lead to impulsiveness, aggression, and fear. It would seem that another impact of being raised in isolation would be a negative impact on social abilities. When animals raised in isolation are introduced into a social setting, they don't seem to mix well, to put it mildly. So, for this scene, this piece of information is wonderful. The writers did their homework and the Indominus does fit the bill for an animal raised in isolation. For now. Hold on to this information though, it will be important later. What's also noteworthy from this conversation is that the writers both keep Owen consistent, but in doing so, they demonstrate why Owen is such a strange choice for examining the pen. Owen asks questions about the dinosaur itself. What is it made out of? How was it raised? Etc. This is good consistency with Owen as a character because he works with dinosaurs. He trains them. Likely, he knows different behavioral patterns and what are and aren't good ways to raise one. What he doesn't do is ask anything about the paddock, the size of the animal, or anything that would indicate he knows how to gauge the paddock's quality properly. He doesn't ask what the dimensions are or why they're still building. Though he's here to inspect the paddock, that seems to be the last thing on his mind, which again raises the question, why pick Owen for this task? There's another question that comes to mind from this interaction as well. Did they not have anyone advising them on how to raise this dinosaur? It would seem that they hatched the I-Rex, shoved it in a pen, and said, "Have a nice life, we'll feed you." But any animal expert, not to mention dinosaur expert, could have told you this is a terrible idea. Why is Claire only now hearing these things for the first time? This is a massive project for the park and you don't even have any animal experts involved? And you may think it's safe to assume they did have experts involved, but the movie clearly tells us they didn't, because when Owen points out the many issues with how the I-Rex was raised, Claire seems annoyed and asks if this is a problem.
Is there a problem?
Animals raised in isolation aren't always the most functional.
So no, they didn't have anyone consulting on how to raise this animal. How incompetent can you be? But if you think that's bad, oh boy, buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. Do you remember in part 1 when I said that there are some scenes with so many issues that we'd simply have to walk line by line through the scene? This is quite possibly the worst. Though to be honest, this scene is pretty widely known to be somewhat contrived. However, I think many underestimate just how bad this scene is. So let's do this. So the I-Rex isn't showing up and Claire goes to check the thermal scanners. As she does that, Owen walks to the window and notices giant scratches on the wall of the paddock. The thermal detection comes back not detecting anything, and Claire begins to panic. She leaves the room saying she can track the Indominus from the control room, fearing it's escaped. She then speeds off, rushing back to the control room in her vehicle. Owen and a few others enter the paddock, only to find, surprise, the Indominus is still there. The Indominus eats some other guy opens the door, and the monster escapes. Okay. Deep breaths. Here we go. Let's deal with these scratches first, because I have a question. When were those scratches made? If they had been there since before Claire and Masrani visited, how has no one noticed them yet? In fact, how did Claire and Masrani not notice it? And how was the Indominus not noticed when making these marks to begin with? There's a guard there and also a construction crew just outside. You don't think they would have heard this enormous creature clawing the crap out of the wall? And it gets even worse if this happened between this visit and when Claire comes with Masrani. There's been at best an hour or two since they were there, and there have been people everywhere around the paddock since. How did this go unnoticed? There's no other way to put it. This is a plot hole. Now, we have an issue of how the I-Rex avoids detection. The Indominus is invisible to sight as well as thermal detection scans. Later in the movie, Will explains these are both possible because the cuttlefish DNA gave her the ability to camouflage, and the tree frog DNA gave her the ability to avoid heat detection. On the surface, this sounds right, but there is a major problem here. And at this point, I want to say thank you to Matt Pat at The Film Theorist for pointing this out, and going further into the science on this than most. Credit where credit's due. In his theory titled Jurassic World Was an Inside Job, Matt Pat points out that both these abilities would demand opposite things from the I-Rex. To camouflage, the cuttlefish changes the color of its skin via chromatophores. The I-Rex would have to take on a darker green tint to hide in the pen. However, to modulate its infrared output, a tree frog has to change the color of its skin to either absorb or reflect light, changing the temperature of the animal. In order to be infrared camouflaged, the I-Rex would have to be a very light color, which would make it stick out like a sore thumb to the human eye. Now, you may say, yes, but in this universe it doesn't work that way. It doesn't have to be real science. To which I say, the writers tried to ground their idea in real-life science. Think about it. Why wouldn't they just say this is a random mutation they never saw coming? That would be somewhat more believable, as it's at least unexplained rather than a direct contradiction. But no, the writers chose to give us references that we can check them on. They just so happen to pull from references that are inherently contradictory in this case. But, I hear you say, the I-Rex was just in a different area of the pen. It didn't have to camouflage with the naked eye, it just had to hide from thermal detection. A valiant effort to be sure, but a vain one nonetheless. You see, from the first movie in this series, bigger dinosaurs, especially Rex-sized and bigger, have always made a giant impact sound when walking nearby. However, when the Indominus jumps Owen and the others in the pen, you can hear 3 footsteps before it's right on top of them. And not only that, but you see it move away from nearby trees, which is presumably where it was hiding. And if that isn't enough, we can see that they have cameras throughout the pen as well. These cameras can see more than just thermal. You can see the picture right on the screen. A giant, bigger than Rex dinosaur would have been easy to spot. And last but not least, when we see the overhead shot of the pen in the control room, the pen really isn't big enough for it to hide in. It's actually quite small. So yes, it had to use both of these abilities, and no, it can't do that. This is a plot hole. Now that we've discussed the possibility of it even using these abilities, there is another fundamental question that must be asked here. Was this all on purpose? Did the Indominus scratch up the wall and hide itself to make them believe it escaped? Owen sure seems to think so a few scenes from now.
Not watching. She marked up that wall as a distraction. She wanted us to think she escaped.
Hold on, we are talking about an animal here.
If that's the case, I want you to consider what that means. The Indominus Rex is such an intelligent creature that it not only knew that there were cameras watching it, and that it could hide from those cameras, but it knew that there were thermal cameras, and it hid from them too. But before doing all this, the Indominus scratched up the wall because it knew humans would think that it meant it had escaped. The Indominus knew that there was such a thing as the outside world, even though it had been raised in this pen its whole life. It can somehow comprehend these concepts. And it knew that if humans think it escaped, they would enter the pen and it could get a small free snack. That is the generous version. The unfortunately more likely version is that it knew and did all this not because it knew it would get a free snack, but because it knew they would open the door that it somehow knows exists and it could go free. And oh, by the way, it just so happened to have planned all this for the day that Claire, Masrani, and Owen would be visiting. Do you see how much of a problem this is? A human with a modern human's knowledge would have a hard time formulating this plan, not to mention pulling it off. But it's outright impossible this dinosaur that has only ever been inside this paddock knows even remotely close to enough information to formulate this plan. This is a plot hole. But it didn't do it on purpose, you may say. Okay, let's run with that for a moment. The I-Rex randomly scratches the wall and it just so happens to be at a time when, for some reason, no one happens to see it. No one knows this happens, somehow. That in and of itself is a plot hole. But we now must believe that it just so happens that it then uses camouflage randomly, and that just so happens to be when humans show up. It didn't do that the last time humans were here. How convenient. Not only that, but it also randomly and impossibly modulates its body temperature at the same time for no reason whatsoever. How convenient. To call this a plot contrivance is an understatement on the level of saying the Titanic bumped into an ice cube. And as much as you may think we're ready to move on, we are not. You see, there's a few extremely obvious things any normal human being with half a brain would do in this situation. First off, why would you not ask any of the dozens of people around the paddock if they just so happen to see a gargantuan creature climb over the wall? Now, this is just a hunch, but I feel that would be extraordinarily noticeable, wouldn't it? Not only that, but the construction workers earlier were working on a part that seems to be directly on the other side of the wall from where the I-Rex scratched up. It would literally have had you climb over them to get out from there, and you didn't think to ask them? Secondly, why wouldn't Owen go outside to look for literally any marks that would indicate it escaped? When giant dinosaurs walk through an area, it tends to leave a pretty noticeable mark. But this same man who will somehow track either the boys or the I-Rex over a fair distance later doesn't even think to look to see if there's any other evidence it got out. Thirdly, why on God's green earth would Claire not call from the observation room? I know this is a common question, but there are a few offered answers. Number one, she didn't have reception. Well, besides the fact that the movie never gives this reason, there's the small problem that she has had reception everywhere else on the island. In fact, in the T-Rex observatory, Zach takes a call with no reception problems. Only once in the entire movie does anyone have reception problems, and it's nowhere near here. So it seems the movie is pretty consistent that there's generally good reception. In fact, even the random area in the woods where the I-Rex attacks the ankylosaurs has good enough reception for Zach to get a call. If there isn't reception here, the movie needs to tell us this, and even then, it's a massive contrivance for the plot. Now, this also doesn't work logically. Why wouldn't you make sure you have reception in key areas around your park? You need to be able to communicate easily, and you also want your guests to be able to use their phones as they please. Also, we see them using landlines elsewhere in the park. Especially if this was an area with bad service, as contrived as that alone would be, why wouldn't there be a landline in the observatory? Isn't being able to communicate kind of a big deal when you're running a park? Outside of an extraordinary contrivance, this explanation falls flat 6 ways from Sunday. Number 2. Claire was panicked and not thinking clearly, so she forgot. Okay, first of all, if she is panicked, it would seem that she would want to avoid outside, right? Like, for all she knows, there's an IREX sitting on top of her car waiting to eat her. But I guess the movie didn't consider this because she doesn't even seem to consider that possibility. But Claire obviously is thinking clearly enough to think to track it, meaning her brain isn't only in panic mode. It would be awfully convenient for the story if she remembers it has a tracker, but doesn't remember to simply call from the observatory. Number 3, Claire was trying to get back as quick as she could to coordinate a response. First of all, this excuse boils down to, Claire was so sure the animal had escaped that she decided to forego a 20-second phone call because she couldn't lose those 20 seconds. Right. Secondly, Claire on that very phone call is already having them get asset containment rolling.
We have an asset out of containment. Put ACU on alert. This is not a drill.
We never see her needing to be in the control room to get ACU rolling. So no, she didn't have to rush back to the control room to coordinate a response. Number 4. Claire had a bad moment. She just acted illogically. People aren't always logical. I must admit, I really do hate this defense. You can literally justify any character decision with this defense. For example, what if back at Owen's house, Owen had randomly snapped and started cannibalizing Claire like a zombie? He just starts going to town. Moments later, he's back to normal, but Claire is now lying there in a bloody pool. You would probably be thinking, that's terrible writing, but I would counter with, but Owen just had a bad moment where he acted illogically. People don't always act logically, you know? In writing, characters don't always have to make the most strictly logical decision. That isn't the point. The point isn't whether the decision makes sense overall, the point is whether it makes sense from this character's perspective. We aren't talking about characters acting logical, but rather characters being logically and consistently written. The "Your Honor, my client pleads temporary insanity" shtick won't save this scene. No matter how you slice it, this is a massive plot hole. By the way, I don't know if you're noticing this, but each and every one of these plot holes are absolutely necessary for this movie to exist. Are you starting to see now why I say this movie is so poorly written? It relies on plot holes as its lifeblood. It cannot exist without contrivance and plot hole after contrivance and plot hole. This scene is evident of that, but wait, there's more. We now enter into the insanity of the decision made by Owen to enter the paddock. Up until this point, Owen seems to be very careful about the dinosaurs and very knowledgeable about what they're capable of. He respects the animals and certainly doesn't want to have to be in close quarters with them. His potential sacrifice of himself in the raptor scene has more weight to it because Owen has already been established as hesitant about the raptors. Talking with Hoskins, he makes it very clear that letting them out on a field test would be a terrible idea. Again, he is portrayed as having tremendous respect for these animals. So, with this in mind, why in the actual heck would this man consider walking into this pen without confirmation of where the dinosaur is? And especially when he knows it can be tracked, so he just needs to wait a minute to confirm it isn't in there. There are 2 explanations I've heard for this. Number 1, temporary insanity, which we've already covered. And number 2, it was reckless to charge into the raptor pen, so it's consistent for Owen to be reckless. Wow. I tell you, the lengths people go to. Well, in case someone can't tell the difference between the two, let's break this down. When Owen charges into the raptor pen, there are several factors at play. Number 1, there's a man's life in imminent danger. Number 2, security wasn't even set up to fire until after he's already in the pen. Number 3, if security fires, his work has gone down the drain and he'll lose whatever connection he has with these animals. Or at least, that's what he thought. And most importantly, number 4, he has to make a decision right away. If he doesn't, there will be consequences one way or the other. Now, compare this to entering the Indominus cage. No one's life is in imminent danger if he doesn't act right away. In fact, there's only the potential of putting someone's life in danger by entering, making him inconsistent with his decision from before. Now he's putting people in potential danger willy-nilly. Not only that, but what is it he's so desperate to see from the inside of the pen that he can't wait a few minutes? When they walk in, they just walk up to the wall that they could clearly see from the observation room and just stare at it. Literally nothing beneficial comes from entering the paddock. So no, this is not consistent with Owen as a character. Now, while standing at the base of the wall, the men discuss the likelihood that the IREX just climbed right over. I know we addressed this earlier, but guys, construction crew right outside? Rotund security guy inside? This isn't a freaking ninja. If it escaped, it did so loudly and very noticeably. Why does everyone just chuck their brain out the window for this scene? There's also a part where the radio has bad reception for some reason. If you think this comes off as completely contrived, that's because it is. However, by the time they get the message, it's likely too late anyways, so I don't think it matters too much. But for those wondering, there's a difference between radio reception and cell phone reception. This does nothing to establish that the observatory had no reception for Claire to make a call. And even so, once again, why not use a landline? And if you don't have a landline there, why don't you? Anyways, our portly security officer notices that he can't get to the door as the IREX has cut them off, so instead he opens the main gate. Now, this decision has been attacked quite harshly, but I think it actually makes sense. From the guard's perspective, if he doesn't get out of there right now, he's screwed. There's no way this flabby fellow is going to make it to the door, and as selfish as opening the gate may be, I can't fault the movie for this. In fact, I find it completely believable from his perspective. So the chubby chap opens the gate and hides in front of a vehicle. Well, crap. I tell ya, just when I'm starting to give this movie credit. In all fairness, this isn't the worst atrocity in this scene, but if this man wants safety, why wouldn't he head up the stairs to the viewing room? There is time. You could be enclosed in a concrete room instead of sitting in front of a truck. This corpulent man was apparently the kid hiding in the middle of the road with his hand in front of his face when playing hide-and-go-seek growing up. Even if he isn't going to the obvious safe place, why not try to drive a vehicle away? He has to have some vehicle to get here, right? Take that and get the heck out of Dodge. But no, the writers want you to see this man get brutally killed by the IREX so we can establish that Owen is smart and thinks quick on his feet. It's a shame he doesn't use that talent 5 minutes earlier. By the way, quick note here as well. Apparently the construction crew has disappeared. I imagine they would run away when the door opens, but there is no one to be found anywhere. No vehicles are driven off that we can hear or see, and no one is scrambling to escape. It seems the film just forgot they existed. Okay, so one last thing and we're done with this abomination of a scene. When the IREX suspects that there's a fat morsel for her in front of the truck gets knocked clean out of the way. She flips it over to get at the man she suspects to be there. I say she suspects he's there because it doesn't make sense to knock the truck out of the way unless it's still searching in some sense. Otherwise, it would just chomp down on the man if it knew exactly where he was. So the evidence seems to point to the idea that the IREX suspects he was there, likely from scent. However, when it suspects Owen to be under the crane, it bends over and starts sniffing, and I have to wonder why. It clearly suspects something is there, or it wouldn't randomly bend over to smell it. But instead of knocking this crane over like it did 10 seconds ago, it decides to only smell, allowing Owen to live because he's covered in some liquid from the vehicle, possibly gas. Again, this isn't the biggest deal, it just seems a bit convenient to me. It isn't impossible, just convenient. We then join Claire as she enters the control room. She looks to the side and sees two people in what appears to be a grieving embrace, likely relatives of one of the men that just got eaten. It's good that the movie shows that these were actually people rather than just meat bags for the dinosaur to consume. Giving them a line or two to express their sorrow to add to the guilt Claire should be feeling would be nice, but it's still a nice detail that helps bring gravity to what has already happened. That being said, why are they in the control room again? It seems a bit odd that you would bring these people to the control room to tell them what happened, especially when your asset containment is about to hunt down the dinosaur. On the off chance they, I don't know, get eaten, could you imagine what this is going to look like to these people? Everyone in the room then looks to Claire and she encourages them to stay calm. According to her, the implant will shock the dinosaur if it gets too close to a perimeter fence. Okay, is this shocker not something you can activate manually? If you can't, why can't you? Sure, that may not be exactly how invisible fences work for dogs, but this isn't exactly your neighbor's pit bull we're talking about. Also, that's what shock collars do, and that is for your neighborhood pit bull. We couldn't figure out how to get that for the giant mutant monster? Especially when an animal breaks out and is threatening someone, you really need to be able to manually shock them. Not only does that not happen here, but later there are dinos that get free that never get shocked either. More on that later. Anyways, Vivian suddenly starts calling to put out a park-wide alert, and the movie starts losing its mind again for a bit. Why does Vivian just assume this is what she's supposed to do? She has no one higher up telling her to do this, and she's instantly vetoed by Masrani. Claire, Masrani, anyone else in the room, no one tells her to do this. It would be like me telling my coworkers in the warehouse that they can have the day off. I don't just get to make management calls like that. However, this little piece of absurdity is quickly overshadowed by what Masrani says after telling her to stop. He says, "Let asset containment capture it quietly." The very existence of this park is predicated on our ability to handle incidents like this. It was an eventuality, okay?
Right.
I want you to imagine that a local zoo had a lion break out and eat a few people. Then I want you to imagine that the zoo owner says that it was an eventuality and it's just about them being able to handle the damage and recapture the animal. Anyone in their right mind would think that it is nuts that a highly deadly animal escaping and eating a few people is a simple eventuality. No, it's not. People by the thousands are putting their lives in your hands every day. They expect that you aren't completely incompetent. And this goes back to what we discussed earlier about the need to make the I-Rex cage bigger. Why are you not giving yourself an immense safety buffer? An animal escape should never be an eventuality. It shouldn't even be a possibility. Now, that isn't accounting for someone basically letting it out. That's a different circumstance. But outside of sabotage or something similar like the original Jurassic Park, there should be no scenario where an animal can escape. 2 people have already died. Do you know what kind of legal action will come crashing down on this park after this? Not to mention the PR nightmare that will happen when people learn about this. Welcome to Jurassic World, where a few of you getting eaten because we are completely 100% incompetent is definitely going to eventually happen. Virtually no one will want to come to a park like this. In other words, the very existence of this park is predicated on something like this never ever happening. Because if it does, the park will not exist for much longer. It's literally the exact opposite of what he says. Movie, please just stop already. Give some effort to explaining how your plot comes around. Don't just give us throwaway lines that crumble upon 1 second of examination. At this point, someone might say, yes, but that is exactly what Lowry points out by saying you should put that on the brochure. Right, but the movie being aware of how stupid its explanations are is not a justification for them. The evidence is clear that this mindset is how the park was built, with not even an ounce of forethought. How do you become the 8th richest man on Earth with this approach to anything? How can you even dress yourself in the morning? And by the way, if this really is an eventuality, which it shouldn't be, but if it is, why aren't you overwhelmingly prepared to address issues just like this? They send a handful of guys on foot with zappy sticks to poke the animal into submission, and the animal has plenty of time to rampage before they get there. If you really think there's a high chance of one of these things breaking out, why wouldn't you have ACU helicopters to hunt this thing down and tranquilize it? Both Jurassic games understood this. Animal gets out, send a helicopter after it. Now you may need ground forces as well, but imagine how much quicker and cleaner it would be to track down and tranquilize it if they had ACU choppers. Seriously, could you imagine how much better it would be for ACU if they could simply fly to where the tracker indicates? You could still send a ground team, but you'd be able to have support from the air, not to mention having eyes on your target very quickly. Couple this with the fact that you could use tranquilizer darts, and you would have an extremely obvious and extremely easy way to quickly recapture this dinosaur, with 0 lives being put at risk. Heck, even the police have helicopters and they never have to take down giant monsters. Think about it. Price clearly isn't the issue here. You have a single attraction for your park costing you $26 million, but you can't drop a few million on some helicopters? What could possibly be the reason they don't have any? But let's be honest. The reason ACU doesn't have helicopters is that the Indominus would have no way to counter it at this point in the movie. The writers wrote themselves into a corner on this one and never tried to justify getting out of it. ACU doesn't have helicopters. There's no good reason why, they simply don't. And imagine if it was a different animal that breaks out. Take the T-Rex for example. If Rexy gets out, she's right in the middle of the park itself. If you don't have a lightning fast response, people could die by the hundreds. You should probably have a bunker or two as well, but more on that one later. Again, if something breaking out is an eventuality, which again it shouldn't be, but if it is, there's no excuse for not having a far better ACU team with far better equipment at their disposal. Claire then tells the audience that the I-Rex paddock is 4 miles from the closest attraction and that no one else will get eaten. Asset containment can handle it. The safety of hundreds and thousands of people is in the hands of imbeciles. Folks, the dinosaur has the base genome of the T-Rex. Now, it's a superior version, but let's just go based off the T-Rex speed as established in the original Jurassic Park. In that movie, Hammond has this to say about the speed of the T-Rex.
Well, we clocked the T-Rex to 32 miles an hour.
It may be reasonable to think the I-Rex is faster, but let's just go with this for now to be kind to the movie. From where we see Claire calling from earlier in the movie, it's clear the I-Rex paddock is in the northwest area of the island. When we see the I-Rex moving on the map in this scene, it's moving southeast. In other words, it's practically making a beeline for the nearest attraction. That combined with a line from Lowry that,
"Okay, it's moving really fast,"
makes the 4-mile thing extremely stupid. Why? Well, it's simple mathematics really. In the next scene, we'll see ACU still loading up and getting ready to go, meaning they haven't left yet. The I-Rex is heading straight for the nearest attraction at somewhere around 32 miles an hour, meaning it should get there in roughly 8 minutes after exiting the paddock. However, the I-Rex left the paddock before Claire ever got to the control room, and you can see that it has already made significant progress. So if we're being extremely generous, the I-Rex is no more than 5 minutes from the closest attraction. Even if ACU can somehow miraculously get loaded up and to the I-Rex within 5 minutes,
Unlikely.
you're pushing it awfully close. Even closing down the northern attractions would be something, but no, they do absolutely nothing. And for what? Is closing down a few attractions for a little bit going to be that big of a problem for the park? Even if you're confident that the impossible will happen and ACU will somehow contain this animal, it's just common sense to say, sorry ladies and gents, but due to some animal behavioral issues, we must close the northern section of the park while we address the issue. Please enjoy the rest of the attractions in the meantime. We intend to have these attractions back up and running within a few hours. Anyways, we see a short clip of ACU gearing up, confirming they haven't even left yet, and you hear a voice over the radio saying this is a non-lethal operation. One of the ACU officers activates what appears to be an electric prod, and the scene cuts. This once again confirms that this movie has forgotten it is a sequel, and I alluded to this earlier. You see, in the Lost World Jurassic Park, there is a hunter named Roland. It was his intent to kill a T-Rex until Nick steals the shells from his gun. Roland resorts to using tranquilizer darts to put the Rex to sleep. At best, it took 2 darts to sedate the Rex, as that is all Roland is seen to have, and he clearly didn't have time to get off any more than that. So it would seem that tranquilizer darts are very effective in the Jurassic universe. With the I-Rex being a little bigger than the T-Rex, you may need to hit it with maybe 3 darts instead, but either way, it's far better than trying to shock it into submission. Even with the carnage to come when ACU finds the I-Rex, there's far more than enough time and people to hit it with 10 darts, not to mention 3. Why are you not using tranquilizer darts? Even the games understand this. In both Jurassic Park Operation Genesis and Jurassic World Evolution, your security sedates the dinosaur with tranquilizer if they escape or need to be relocated. It's almost like it's the obvious choice. But no, this movie is going to pretend that poking the I-Rex with electric sticks is a good idea. And by the way, guess what they will be using to shoot down the birds later in this very movie? Semi-auto tranquilizer guns. Why aren't you using those right now, you idiots? I don't know if I need to keep saying this every time we hit one of these, but ACU not using tranquilizer darts is a massive plot hole. The movie gives us no reason why they shouldn't be using it. Even if some men would still die, the I-Rex would be sedated and the movie would, for all intents and purposes, be over. Anyways, we then move to Barry and Hoskins talking with the raptors all in some restraints around their heads. It seems clear that they don't enjoy being in these restraints, and for the life of me I can't figure out why, with the shape of their heads, they just can't back out of them. They seem to be struggling left and right, up and down against these restraints, but not back and forth. But with the design of the restraints, it looks like they would be able to at least move a little bit back and forth, so I really don't understand why they're not doing that. It's not really a story problem, it just seems like an odd design choice just so we can have the characters petting the raptors. Anyways, Hoskins asks how fast the raptors are, and Barry says they can go 40 or 50 if they're hungry. Apparently they don't make raptors like they used to, because in the original Jurassic Park, Robert, the park's game warden, tells us that raptors have cheetah speed, able to go 50 or 60 miles an hour.
Fast for a biped?
Cheetah speed? 50, 60 miles per hour if they ever got out in the open.
As insignificant as this may be, breaking continuity for no reason is just a dumb, lazy decision. But it's good to know that if you're in a vehicle, raptors shouldn't be able to keep up with you for very long, especially if you're driving in a straight line. Even 18-wheelers with a reasonable load can go 0 to 60 in under a minute. We'll just hold on to that little detail for later. Barry and Hoskins then have a short discussion, and Hoskins touches one of the raptors. Everything is cut a bit short when Barry gets the notification that there's an asset out of containment and they've lost 2 guys. Hoskins makes a call noting that they have an opportunity, and the scene ends. This scene acts as a setup for what we see later with Hoskins bringing his team in. Now, many have suggested that it makes no sense that Hoskins says, They're gonna learn all kinds of things about their new asset now. And then when on the phone, he says, "We might have an opportunity here." The idea is that there's no way he could have known which asset is out of containment. However, if you listen close enough, the men in the background shout out a few key lines. Two of the lines are, "That's the new one," and "That's Indominus."
Code 19! They stayed with us 2 guys.
What's a code 19?
Asset out of containment.
As much as I'm all for criticizing something that doesn't make sense, I want to be fair to the film. There's an explanation within the scene itself, so it's not a fair criticism. We then pick up with Zack and Gray on the monorail, likely traveling to the gyrosphere area. Gray is suddenly very sad, though Zack is attempting to flirt with the girls behind him. Gray suddenly asks what would happen if their parents get a divorce. The boys go back and forth on the topic, and the sequence ends with the camera panning to the ACU vehicles traveling not too far away. As much as I can appreciate that the writers are trying to develop the characters a little bit, this scene is very odd to say the least. First of all, as understandable as it is that Gray may be sad his parents are getting divorced, why all of a sudden right now? He's still able to see dinosaurs, which had him very excited just a few scenes ago. Well, they slowed down and he has time to just think now. Well, that would make some sense, as often the heavier parts of our life hit us when the excitement is no longer there to distract us. But there are a few problems with this. Number one, there are still dinosaurs right there. Sure, you aren't right next to them, but this is the same kid losing his mind with excitement a few minutes ago in the Innovation Center. I'm guessing seeing those dinosaurs should still be at least a little distracting. Number two, he's had other moments to just think, and there's been no hint of this. You're telling me this never came up on the plane or boat here, but now it does? It just seems like very odd, forced character development. Though I suppose I should just be grateful the movie tried at this point. Anyways, as we follow the asset containment unit traveling, we see people kayaking down a peaceful river with several herbivores around them. There are several long-necked dinosaurs, a couple Parasaurolophuses, and at least 3 Stegosauruses. Now, at this point, I'm honestly not sure if whoever designed this little shot has even watched the previous movies within the last 10 years. Do you remember the carnage caused by the Stegos in The Lost World? These aren't exactly peaceful animals. Why would you let them roam free where you also allow completely undefended people to be? If they snap for any reason, which they're known to do, these people are dead. At this point though, this is downright consistent with how this park is set up. Take absolutely zero precautions and expect people to get killed. Brilliant. Good night, this movie packs a lot of crap into even the tiniest details. We then see the asset containment team is being monitored by the control room. They apparently have heart rate monitors on each member of the team, and they have a few cameras to watch them. Owen enters the room and is very ticked off. Claire explains that there must have been a malfunction with the equipment. This is where Owen explains that the I-Rex did this on purpose. I kid you not, Owen says, "She marked up that wall as a distraction. She wanted us to think she escaped." We went over how ridiculous this idea is, though I must admit I'm not sure if it's any less rational than the alternative. But the movie seems to be depicting Owen as correct in this scene, so it would appear that the Indominus was indeed smart enough to come up with that plan. Claire tries to bring Owen back down to Earth by saying that it's an animal we're talking about. Owen responds by saying a highly intelligent animal. And that's it, folks. There's your justification for how it pulled this off. How could it know all this impossible stuff? It's smart. That fixes it, don't you see? Let's not explain where this intelligence comes from. Every dinosaur it shares DNA with isn't half as smart as this dinosaur, so there's no explanation where the mental capacity comes from. I'm sure I'm just not supposed to think about that. Whatever, let's just move on. Owen notices that they're bringing non-lethal weapons and asks about it. This is where Masrani tells us that it was a $26 million investment. Owen says that the men are going to die and they need to call the mission off right away. At this point, the ACU team has exited the vehicles and is tracking the I-Rex on foot. The team comes across the tracking implant still attached to a piece of flesh. What seems odd is that there isn't any other evidence that the dinosaur came through this area. You'd expect to see flattened grass, giant footprints in the soft earth, and more, but there's none of that outside some bloodied leaves. Either way, the ACU member notes that the blood isn't clotted, so the animal must be close. The tracker in the flesh is visible on the screen in the control room. This prompts Masrani to ask what it is. Owen says it's her tracker and she clawed it out. Claire asks how she knew to take it out, and Owen says it's because she remembered where they put it in. Now, in case you haven't noticed, this movie has a get-out-of-jail-free card for every corner it's backed itself into. How did the dinosaur know half the things it needed to in order to escape? Because it's smart. How did it know to claw the tracker out? Because it's smart. Forget the fact that the animal would have no clue what the thing is. The writers needed her to not be trackable anymore, so the dinosaur just happened to be that smart. And if you think this is going to end here, think again. Either way, it turns out the Indominus was camouflaged mere meters from the tracker. I don't know why it did this unless it knew that people would come to this location and it could ambush them. In fact, that does seem to be what the movie's telling us. Even if it remembered that implant and managed to claw it out, I have no earthly idea how it knew that it was something that was used to track her. Man, that is one smart dinosaur. The Indominus then proceeds to dominate the battle, having very little issue resisting the attack from the weapons used. For some reason it never registered that they may need something a bit more potent, but at this point anyone demonstrating competence would have been flagged for inconsistency. We've already discussed the fact that they should have tranquilizers, so I won't beat that dead horse again. But with how easily the I-Rex dominates the squad, I'm left wondering, what else did you expect? Frankly, the T-Rex wouldn't have had much trouble with this group either. And no, it isn't because they were surprised. They all got their shot at firing their weapons except for the guy who picks up the tracker. The camouflage ambush was really only about style. It didn't gain any tactical advantage and it didn't need it either. Again, I really don't know what they were expecting from a handful of guys attacking with pathetic weapons. They may as well have put some socks on, slid their feet on the carpet, and poked it with their finger, because it would have been equally bothered by that shock. You don't have to be Owen to know these guys aren't going to survive. No tranquilizer, no helicopters, no equipment that could have a shot at downing any large carnivore, not to mention this genetic hybrid. The string of incompetencies just continues. Anyway, someone breaks out a shotgun, but that only serves to annoy the I-Rex as it charges the man. The man apparently is a bit too confident in his gun as he also charges directly into the mouth of the animal. This has always seemed a bit odd to me. The man played a game of chicken with a 50-foot-long dinosaur. You would think he would at least try to dodge away at the last moment, but no, straight into the mouth of the beast. The man had guts, I'll give him that much. A little short on the brains, but you can't question the guts. Now with the ACU team thoroughly wiped out, Owen tells Masrani and Claire to evacuate the island. Claire protests that they would never reopen and ultimately closes only the northern section of the park. Claire, what exactly is your alternative? The people you have for this exact moment didn't even come close to getting the thing under control. Why is she not evacuating? The next thing they try is something Claire won't even consider right now. So at this point, Claire is saying no to evacuation, but not offering any course of action. What, is she just hoping it goes away? This makes no sense. Owen does give a nice speech about the animal discovering everything for the first time, and as a piece of dialogue, it's actually really good. He notes that the animal was raised in captivity and is now finding out where she fits in the food chain. This is consistent with his warnings from earlier in the movie and is a fair take on how this animal could react under the circumstance. It's little gems like this piece of dialogue that show that the movie really did have potential. Such a well-crafted line. It's a shame the writers didn't keep this level of quality throughout. Anyways, Owen recommends they strap the M134, also known as a minigun, to the helicopter and smoke the dinosaur out. Though that is a start, I can't help but wonder if that's all they have. Wouldn't it be better to have the helicopter along with other supporting forces all at once? That way you can use overwhelming force. No, one single M134 is all they need apparently. No need to use any more force than that. I'm sure that plan can't fail. Owen recommends Masrani talk to the lab about the I-Rex, and then he leaves the room. After Claire closes the northern part of the park, we cut to Zack and Gray waiting to get into a gyrosphere. Now, everything about the gyrospheres is monumentally stupid, but we will get there in the next video. However, Gray is talking Zack's ear off about how DNA can survive millennia and seems to be back to normal. Like, it's really strange. It feels like the writers knew they needed to try to give the character some sort of development, so they gave the short exchange on the monorail. But now Gray is back to his spunky, nerdy self. How he got over the devastation he was dealing with earlier is beyond me. I'm just left wondering how the writers want us to feel about Gray right now. Are we supposed to feel bad for this poor kid who's crushed emotionally? Or was he just having a bad couple minutes? It seems to be a tonal clash in how this character has been presented over the past couple minutes. As Gray is talking, Zack is staring directly at a few girls a couple feet away. And it really is odd because one of them smiles at him and he just stares at her. Definitely a little on the creepy side. Zack tells Gray to shut up and Gray asks what he thinks will come from Zack just staring at the girls. The girls laugh at this and then board the gyrosphere. Zack and Gray then get into their own gyrosphere and they're off. Moments after the boys take off, the employee running the gyrosphere gets a call, presumably telling him to shut it down and send everyone back to the main area. Again, we'll be addressing the gyrospheres themselves in the next video, don't you worry. We then cut to Dr. Wu exiting a secret lab area as Masrani comes to talk with him. Wu at first refuses to tell Masrani what the animal is made out of until Masrani gets into the details of what the animal did. This is where Wu reveals that cuttlefish and tree frogs are where two of the I-Rex's abilities come from. This is also where we confirm that it was Masrani himself who commissioned the creation of this animal through a memo to Dr. Wu. Masrani tells Wu to cease all operations immediately. Wu responds by saying that Masrani is acting like they're engaged in some sort of mad science. Wu points out that filling in the genetic code is par for the course. Masrani adamantly declares that he never asked for a monster, to which Wu responds,
"Monster is a relative term. To a canary, a cat is a monster. We're just used to being the cat."
This closes out the scene. Now, this reasoning is a bit weird. The movie portrays it like this was an argument that was very convincing, but is it? Masrani is arguing that there's a difference between having a dinosaur and having a super aggressive eating machine. Wu's rebuttal doesn't really make any sense. Yes, a cat is a monster to a canary. So why would the canaries create the cats? Wu is just basically arguing that the canary is lower on the food chain, but Masrani is arguing that it's a bad idea to go around popping out cats if you're a canary. Perhaps you could argue this is logical from both their perspectives. It just seems like the writers wrote an argument where one response gets only at the language but not the spirit of what was being said. Being the canary now doesn't change the fact that the cat I-Rex is still a monster. Whether or not that was intended in the writing, I leave for you to judge. And with that, we conclude both the scene and part 2 of this series. We're almost halfway through the movie and are roughly on track for a 4-part series. Thank you for joining me. It's once again an honor for people to deem this content worthy of their time. I'm continually trying to hammer out ways to increase the quality of this series to produce a better product. Many have given their feedback concerning part 1, and I do appreciate the input and have tried to apply many suggestions I've received. I also got a new microphone and the sound quality is a night and day difference. I'm now using an AT2020 XLR and it's vastly superior to the cheaper mic the first part was recorded on. For some reason that mic sounded like you were recording just below the surface of the water during a tsunami. Even after heavy editing, I recognized that the audio quality was simply too poor to continue the series. Now with that said, once again I'm not exactly sure when part 3 will be coming out. I can simply say I will be working very hard to get it out as soon as I can. You may want to subscribe and follow me on Twitter, which is linked in the description if you'd like updates on the next episode. That's entirely up to you. I'm not the type of person that tries to push people into those sorts of choices. Please do feel free to let me know what you think of this series in the comments. Already there are some people pointing out a few things I've missed. It's fascinating to see that with as thorough as I've been, it seems there's even more worth covering. This means I may potentially do an addendum episode after the series is complete to cover what I've missed or to correct things I may have gotten wrong. And this is all dependent on there being enough content to justify such a video. With that being said, thank you once again for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day, and goodbye.